Hello and welcome to another update for Archaeology Rush. This is going to be another change list video, just where I talk about some of the back end stuff that we've been working on. This is the video for the 9th of July, and you can grab the latest version on the itch.io in the description if you want to play any of some of the stuff we've been looking at. So the first thing I just wanted to talk about, a fix that I have made this week, is I noticed a pretty big error, bug, and essentially this boiled down to letters. So I have this letter manager class, and this letter manager handles all of the letters that are shown as part of the gameplay. So anytime the player receives a letter, that's when this letter manager is shown. And I was realizing that in some instances, uh, particularly when we have transition between scenes, we were in a position where the save, particular parts of the save, were being overwritten with kind of blank data. So I wanted to just talk about what actually the error was and how I went about fixing it. So the first thing to note was that all of the save data exists in this chunk getter letter chunk. So the way that Archaeology Rush is save data system works is that there is multiple different chunks of data, and this is because I came to the save data quite late. So I've had a load of data which is disparately across loads of different systems in the game. I didn't want to make one global class to manage the save data. I'll have that kind of spiraling over and have lots of global state. But essentially, a lot of this save data is kind of global. So instead, what I made were these chunks of data that are saved inside of a profile. So these chunks have a different types of class, and this one in particular was the letter class. Now, namely, the letter class has this fun clear data method, and that clear data method is used inside the letter manager, namely inside the onSave profile. Now, the issue here was that onSave was registered to the chunk. Whenever the chunk was forced to save, the onSave function was also called here. And of course, we're looking in hindsight. This is the fix, this is the working version. But essentially, what was happening was that the chunk had a this register basically took in a function, and that function was just calling into onSave. So it was just the letter manager onSave function. Now, the letter manager only exists, and I think I mentioned this in last week. Is that the letter manager only actually exists when we are in the desk, like the world map screen, which is not ideal. Now, there were a couple of options. I could make the letter manager global, but then that causes other problems. I'd need to refactor this whole stuff. But instead, what I preferred to do was to just clean up after myself. So what was happening was on save, the letter chunk was clearing, but then all of this letter container and all of the data in this class didn't exist because the letter manager didn't exist at this point. And this was if we were saving anywhere else apart from the world map. And that meant that we cleared the data, but did not actually add the proper data back in, which is not ideal. So we still wanted, it's a perfectly valid thing for us to clear all the letter data from the chunk. We don't want to save multiple of the same letters. Every time you save, you duplicate a letter. We don't want that situation, so we do want to clear the data. However, we also don't really want to be running this onSave function if the letter manager doesn't exist. So inside our chunk getter, there is a list of registered onSavers. So this is just things registered. And essentially, when we register an onSave, we just give it our node. We're like, great, cool, here's a node. And now, instead of having to kind of manage that lifespan and all of that, we have a kind of two-pronged attack for fixing this. So when save is called, we go through everything and we basically just call on save via the Godot's call method. If that method doesn't exist, it will sort of show up as an error. It won't crash the whole game. And then when we are in a position where that node that we have in registered on savers has died, we are in a position where we can just check whether it's valid every time we call save. If it's not, we'll just get rid of it. Just do a bit of cleanup and then continue through. Essentially, we're doing the cleanup here because we're adding it to a to remove list. But essentially, we also just push a warning to say, hey, you probably should have deregistered that because it's not valid. But yeah, so if we jump back over to our sort of save function, we can just say register on save and register this function. And now we can unregister it when we have this function exit the tree. So yeah, that is kind of how we fix this issue, and I've been running this for a couple of days now and have absolutely had no issue, which is great. So next on the agenda is actually a fun little addition, and this should be a quick one just to show off. But I've added in, so let's join as some other players, red, green, and blue recruit. So I will cut in here just a little bit of footage just showing them off. But yeah, so I've added in these characters. Originally they were all just red recruit, but of course you wanted different colors. So I've just gone in and updated them on a sprite. I did want to do something a little bit more fancier, which was just the idea that, hey, we could palette swap them. But actually I ran into an issue where, because of the way that these characters are set up, so if we go over to a character just here, so each of the characters are set up in the world. Because of the way that they're set up, essentially I have them down as an animated sprite. So each has their own kind of sprite frames, which is fine. But when it comes to adding in a custom shader, they just billboard. Not billboard. They don't pass any kind of data through. Like the textures are not passed through, and I just did not have the time to write a custom thing. So sometimes simplest option is the best option. So yeah. So the other thing that I wanted to add in this period was the post-level stats letter. And so this is something that I decided to add in a long while ago, and it just took me a while to get this to a point where I could like get it in, and I felt like the points of it. So essentially, in the previous iterations of this game, there was kind of a little animation at the end just showing, hey, this is what you got and this is what you added to your collection. And I felt like, whilst I liked that on some level, I didn't always like the presentation. I never felt like I got it right. And so in this particular version, I felt like that information was just not that useful, but I still wanted to show it off. So I wanted to bring something in, as this is essentially a little bit more of story mode, is to add in something that was just, hey, dear player, you managed to get this from your latest sort of archaeology dig, and this has been catalogued to your collection, because it's about having the sort of biggest collection. And so yeah, that's the main point of this. So I mocked up a letter just to show off essentially how that might look. And so to understand kind of what I wanted out of that. And so that kind of exists of 4 parts. We've got the address in the top right, which is just a text label. We've got the to, we've got the stats, which is this main body of text, and then we've got the from. And so the stats is the thing we really care about. So if we jump into the stats, you can see then this is actually now a working version. It has a script attached to it, which is just adding in that data. So there is a function, and this inherits off a interface, and there is a function called populate. And so basically the way I have the letter system set up is when you go to add a letter from anywhere in the game, you can provide it with sort of metadata, and that's literally just a dictionary of sort of tags and variants. And so that just contains any data you want. And so I will add that this is not code that is written well. I'm certain that there are problems with this code. I mean, I can name one being the fact that if tomb name doesn't exist in the meta, this errors out. But in terms of just flexibly being able to get something up and running, this does the job. So elsewhere in the code, in the game manager, I have a meta being passed in, and it basically says, right, for this rich text label, which is, if you recall, that stats thing, it's the middle main body of the text, I have registered the latest additions to your personal collection following your exploration of this tomb. I've catalogued the following, and then it gets all of the catalogued items and how many catalogued, just prints them out. So it's a really simple function. And we can have multiple of these kind of populated fields that take in data from the metadata. And so the main bulk of the work here was actually getting the game manager, the game manager's end game function, which is up here. Now this is sort of a vestigial bit of code which has many issues and probably needs a refactor, but I live by the idea that it's important to make a game rather than making a nice code base. I make a nice code base in my job as a professional game developer. I don't need to make a nice code base for myself here. And, you know, in this sense, I'm not a gardener, I'm a game developer. So the main important thing here is just getting this working. And so essentially, when the game finishes, that's all we need to care about. We collect up all of the player data. And then I added in just this function that creates this meta. It collects up the treasure information, loops through the endgame data. For each treasure, it tries to see if we already have an index of that treasure. If we don't, then we add that data, and that will now appear as a new line. If we do, we just increment the amount that we have of that item. And then we just add that to our meta object. And then what we do is we grab our global letter manager, which if you watch last week's video, you'll understand a little bit more about why this exists. Actually, earlier in the video, the letter manager only exists as part of the map screen, and this is not in the map screen. This is at the end of tomb exploration. And we give it a letter, and we wanted to open stats letter, and just give it that meta. And so the stats letter exists as something on the letter manager, where it is this letter. That is the letter. It's that template. Essentially, these are all templates that we're kind of creating. So yeah, that is the stats letter. And then essentially I had a whole sort of a letter bonanza, because I then was like, you know what? I really want to add in the papyrus letters. So the papyrus letters are letters that exist, and they're kind of letters they're papyri, whatever the right word is for that existed to basically point the player in the next direction. And with it being an Egypt theme, and I appreciate that this isn't kind of the prettiest, and I can definitely do more work to improve it. But what I wanted to do is I wanted to give players kind of a feeling of like, oh, I am trying to understand more, so players can understand what this Papyrus is sort of saying. And there's two halves of it because you explore two tombs, and that points you to the direction. But in God of War fashion, I'm not expecting players to directly solve this puzzle, because it is not there as a puzzle to solve. Think of it as like that kind of Professor Layton of like, you move the puzzle pieces together and then he goes, right, I've translated that for you. And Henry Pepper's kind of doing that function for us there. But essentially, these two papyri, however you say it, now exist. And so going back to the code, the main thing that I needed then to do was to sort of add in the position to send letters post level. So also in the game manager, I added in this kind of end letter list. And so essentially, when the players end the level, so in this location, so it's on this tomb, when we end a level, not that tomb, I got the tomb wrong, this tomb, we can pass in a letter, and it's kind of a basic letter. So there's basic letters and then there's letters with kind of metadata. And technically this letter can have metadata, there's nothing needed, specific for that, but as far as I'm concerned, it's basically just an image that we show. And then, so this post letter level list gets passed over to the game manager and becomes this. And so on the end, we also fire off and add any unopened letters that we need to add. So yeah, you think, right, job done, amazing, sorted. However, we then ended up with an issue where any letter that gets added got added every single time a level was completed. So we then had to add in a whole nother feature. And now you can kind of see why things take longer than you expect when developing any kind of game where problem begat problem begat problem. Essentially, when we were in a position to sort of open up that data, that letter, and complete that thing, we only want to do it the first time we have played something. So essentially, what I did is I had to get our location chunk, and just check whether we have played this particular tomb before. And we also then want to mark our tomb as being played, because we can mark it being played every single time. That's not a problem. But if we're not replaying it, we want to sort of add our end game dialogues and end game letters. But then we had another problem, which was that in our chunk, we added this new played array, which is great. However, essentially, what we needed to do was convert the old version, because we fundamentally changed the data, and so I never set up this data, location data, to expect it. Essentially, we just had one long list of tomb. So this is the location data in JSON that I get exported out, and you'll notice that there is no tomb state and played little arrays here. Instead, we have each tomb, their identifier, and whether they have been dug up or not, their tomb state. This is a problem, because actually we want to add in some more data into this. So now I needed to basically, if our version was version number 1, we need to then take version number 1 and convert it up to version number 2. And that meant looking through all the data coming in and adding it to a tomb state data, and then adding in a new play data, and then having that be, and then upping the version. So that is the kind of long how we got to being able to add in 2 simple Papyrus's notes and the problems that come from just wanting to add in a couple of pictures. But we're making progress. And on that note, I'm gonna call that for this week, and I'm excited to show you off some of the stuff I have planned for next week. We're getting really close to finishing the Henry Pepper version of the demo, and yeah, we're getting really close, and then we'll move on to the next bit of the demo. But I've got a couple of things I need to do, a couple of people I need to talk to. Once we have that first small kind of minimum viable product version of that demo, then we can move on from there. I'm hoping that some of these problems might speed up once we have gotten past them. But anyway, thanks for watching. I hope you're enjoying these kind of longer form change list videos. I certainly will, I think, appreciate looking back over them, which is the main point of these videos, is so I can have some point of reflection on the many, many hours of work that I put in for something that I hope that people will enjoy playing, but largely is a big vanity project for myself. Well, a small vanity project. On that note, have a lovely week, and thanks for watching. Bye.